Hi, friend. I'm Melissa, and welcome back to Midlife with Melissa. Wherever you're listening today, I am so glad you're here. I've been saving you a seat. So grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and let's spend a little time together. Last week, we talked about rebuilding confidence after losing yourself. We talked about the small promises we keep, the quiet decisions that help us begin trusting ourselves again, and what it means to start showing up for the woman we are becoming. But as I continued thinking about that conversation, I realized there is something else we need to talk about. Because sometimes rebuilding yourself is difficult, not because you are unwilling to try, but because you are already carrying so much. There is a weight many women carry through midlife that cannot always be seen. It does not show up in photographs. It is not always noticeable when we walk into a room. And most of the time, no one asks us about it. It is a weight of remembering what everyone needs. The weight of worrying about the people we love. The weight of changing relationships. Aging parents. Adult children. Grandchildren, marriage, work, our health, our homes, our past, and the questions we quietly carry about our future. It is grief for people we have lost, grief for relationships that changed, grief for the woman we thought we would be by now, and sometimes grief for the years we spent taking care of everyone else while slowly losing touch with ourselves. On the outside, we may look completely fine. We answer when someone asks how we are doing. We smile. We say, "I'm okay," and then we keep moving. But inside, there may be a list running through our minds that never seems to stop. Who needs me? What did I forget? What needs to be fixed? Who is upset? And what happens next? And when will I finally have enough time or energy to take care of myself? I think many women become so accustomed to carrying this invisible weight that we stop realizing how heavy it has become. We tell ourselves, this is just life. Other women manage it. I should be able to handle this. So we keep going. We carry one more responsibility, one more worry, one more disappointment, one more thing we do not want anyone else to have to deal with. And then we wonder why we are exhausted, why we feel emotionally drained, why the smallest problem sometimes feels like the thing that finally breaks us. It is not always because that one problem is so large. Sometimes it is because it landed on top of everything else, everything we had already been carrying. That is what I want to talk about today. The things women carry quietly. The emotions that we hide because we do not want to burden anyone. The expectations we place on ourselves. And what can happen when we finally admit it? This is heavy, not because we are weak, not because we are ungrateful, but because we are human. And maybe acknowledging the weight is the first step toward realizing that we were never meant to carry all of it alone. When I think about the invisible weight I carried, grief was a huge part of it. And not only grief from losing people. There is also grief that comes from relationship changes. Relationships you thought would always look a certain way. People you thought would always be close. Connections you believed would still be a part of your everyday life. Sometimes the people are still here, but the relationship you once knew is gone. And that kind of grief can be difficult to explain. There may not be a funeral. There may not be a moment when everyone gathers around you and understands why you are hurting. Life simply continues while you quietly grieve what you used to be. I carried that grief with me everywhere. I carried it while trying to manage changes in my health. I carried it while wondering why my mind no longer seemed to work the way it once had. There were times when even the simplest decision felt impossible. Someone could ask me, "What do you want for dinner?" And I honestly did not know. It was not that I did not care. It was not that I was trying to be difficult. My mind felt so overwhelmed that even choosing what to eat felt like one more decision I did not have the energy to make. And then I would feel guilty about that too. Guilty that something so simple had become so hard. Guilty that I could not explain why my mind felt like it was stuck. Guilty that the woman who once handled so much could no longer decide what she wanted for dinner. But one of the heaviest sources of guilt for me was work. For so much of our lives, we are taught that working hard is part of being responsible, that we should keep pushing, that we should contribute, that we should be able to get up, go to work, and do what needs to be done, no matter how we feel. But I reached a point when I did not want to work anymore. And even admitting that to myself filled me with shame. I knew the struggles were affecting Jason and me. I knew the pressure did not disappear simply because I was overwhelmed with something. I knew he was carrying responsibilities too. And because I loved him, I felt enormous guilt that I could not force myself to be the person I thought I was supposed to be. I would think, why can't I just make myself do it? Why can't I push through? Why can't I be stronger? But the truth was, I did not feel as though I had anything left to push with. My body was tired. My mind was tired. My heart was tired. And instead of recognizing how depleted I had become, I kept adding guilt to the weight I was already carrying. Guilt did not give me more energy. It did not make my mind clearer. It did not heal the grief. It simply made me feel as though I was failing the person I loved, and I was failing at life itself. Looking back now, I can see that I was not refusing to care. I cared deeply. That was part of why it hurt so much. I cared that Jason was affected. I cared about our future. I cared about being a partner he could depend on. I cared about the woman I used to be. But caring and having the capacity to function are not always the same thing. Sometimes we can love people deeply and still be too overwhelmed to show up in the ways we once did. Sometimes we can want to help and still feel completely empty. And sometimes the guilt of not being able to do more becomes heavier than the original problem. I wish I had understood then that struggling did not mean I was selfish. It did not mean I stopped loving Jason. It did not mean I had become lazy or irresponsible. It meant I was carrying more than I knew how to hold. Grief, fear about my health, fear about my mind, pressure about work, concern for our relationship, and the constant belief that I should be handling all of it better. No wonder deciding what to have for dinner felt impossible. It was never only about dinner. It was one more decision landing on a mind that had already been carrying too much. And maybe that is something we need to remember when we judge ourselves for struggling with the small things. Sometimes that small thing is not the problem. Sometimes it is simply the moment when all the invisible weight finally becomes impossible to ignore. For months, I held almost everything inside. I did not know how to explain what was happening to me. And when you do not understand something yourself, it can feel almost impossible to help someone else understand it. So I became quieter. I withdrew. I kept telling myself that I should be able to work through it on my own. But the longer I held everything in, the heavier it became. The grief, the fear, the guilt, the confusion, the pressure I felt about work and our future, all of it stayed trapped inside of me, growing heavier because I was carrying it alone. Then little by little, I began letting Jason in. Not only by telling him that I was having a hard time, I began telling him what was actually happening inside me. I talked about how frightened I felt, how confused I was by the changes in my mind and body, how guilty I felt about not working, how even simple decisions had begun to overwhelm me, and how ashamed I was that I could not seem to make myself function the way I once had. Those conversations did not happen all at once. It took months and months before I truly began talking. Sometimes I repeated myself. Sometimes I cried. Sometimes I could not find the right words. And sometimes I needed to have the same conversation more than once before I felt understood. But something began to change when I finally stopped trying to hide how much I was struggling. The overwhelming feeling started to loosen. And not because every problem had suddenly been solved, or because the grief disappeared or my health changed overnight, but because the one person I most needed beside me was beginning to understand what I was going through. I was not simply being difficult. I was not trying to make life harder. I was not refusing to care about what our struggles were. I was hurting. And I had been hurting for a long time. Before those conversations, I believe there were moments when Jason thought I was being unwilling. And I understand why it may have looked that way from the outside. He could see what I was not doing. He could see the responsibilities that were not being handled. He could see the financial and emotional strain affecting both of us. But he could not yet see everything happening inside me. And the truth is, I never felt unwilling. There was a long time when I simply did not have any will. And that is different. Being unwilling means you have the ability to act, but you are choosing not to. And what I was experiencing felt more like having no strength left to reach for the next step. I wanted things to be better. I wanted to feel useful. I wanted to contribute. I wanted to feel like myself again. But wanting those things did not automatically give me the ability to make them happen. And that difference mattered. Once Jason began to understand that I was not fighting against him, that I was fighting to find my way through something that I did not understand, the guilt began to loosen its grip. I no longer felt as though I had to prove that I was struggling. I did not have to keep pretending that I was fine. I could finally admit, I do not know how to do this right now. I need you beside me. I need you to believe that I am trying, even when it does not look the way either of us expected. And he stayed beside me. He could not completely understand what I was feeling because he was not living inside my mind or body. But he began to understand that this was real. He began to see that I was not choosing the pain. I was trying to survive. There is something powerful that happens when one person finally sees beyond your behavior and recognizes the pain underneath. The burden does not disappear, but it becomes shared. And sometimes the feeling of relief comes not from finding the perfect answer, but from no longer having to defend the fact that you are hurting. I think so many women are carrying things their partners or families cannot see. From the outside, it may look like withdrawal, irritability, indecision, a lack of motivation, or an unwillingness to participate in life. But underneath those things may be grief, fear, exhaustion, hormonal changes, depression, or a mind and body that have simply been pushed beyond their capacity. That does not mean the people around us are wrong for feeling confused or affected. Their feelings matter too. But healing often begins when we stop standing on opposite sides of the struggle and we begin looking at the struggle together. Jason was not the enemy, and neither was I. We were two people being affected by something neither of us fully understood. Once we recognized that, it became easier to stand beside each other instead of feeling as though we were fighting against one another. And for me, being understood by the person I loved the most did not fix everything, but it gave me enough relief to begin breathing again. It gave me room to stop carrying so much guilt. And it reminded me that maybe I did not have to find my way back completely alone. Once I finally began letting Jason in, something inside me started to soften. Not all at once, and not in some dramatic overnight way, but enough for me to feel a little more room inside myself, a little more air, a little more relief. For so long, I had been carrying everything as though it were mine alone to figure out. The grief, the fear, the guilt, the questions about my health, the confusions about my mind, the pressure I felt about work, about our future, and about the ways my struggles were affecting the person I loved. And when you carry that much by yourself for too long, it can start to feel as though there is no way out. like the weight has simply become your life. But once I started talking, once I stopped holding it all in, I realized something important. The weight may still have been there, but it did not feel quite as crushing when someone else finally understood I was carrying it. That mattered more than I can explain, because being understood gave me something I had been missing: a little bit of room to breathe. And when I finally had room to breathe, I could begin doing something I had not been able to do clearly before. I could begin looking at what was happening to me with more honesty and less fear. I could begin asking questions. I could begin learning. I could begin putting words to things that had felt terrifying while they remained unnamed. That was a turning point for me, because sometimes the invisible weight becomes even heavier when we do not know what we are carrying. We just know we are exhausted, overwhelmed, emotional, confused, and ashamed that we cannot seem to handle life the way we once did. But when I started learning more about what might be happening in midlife, about hormones, perimenopause, mental and emotional changes, and how deeply all of that can affect a woman, I began feeling something that I had not felt in a long time: relief. Not because every answer was suddenly handed to me, not because one piece of information fixed my life, but because I was starting to understand that I was not lazy, I was not selfish, I was not just being difficult, and I was not alone. That kind of understanding can loosen the grip of shame, and shame adds so much unnecessary weight. Shame tells you that you are the problem. Understanding reminds you that you are a person going through something real. That difference matters. It mattered to me. The more I understood, the more I could start separating who I was from what I was experiencing. I was not the grief. I was not the fear. I was not the brain fog, the exhaustion, or the guilt. Those things were affecting me deeply, but they were not my identity. And for a long time, I think I had begun blending all of it together. I had started seeing myself through the lens of my struggle, instead of saying, I am going through a hard season. It felt more like, this is who I am now. But that was never the full truth. I was still me, a hurting me, a confused me, a deeply overwhelmed me, but still me. And once I began understanding that, I think my will slowly started returning. Not in huge ways at first. It was quiet. It came back with curiosity, in conversation, in being willing to read something, listen to something, to think one hopeful thought, to take one small step. That is what the beginning of healing looked like for me. It did not look impressive from the outside. It looked small, private, fragile even, but it was real. And maybe that is important to say, because I think sometimes we expect healing to look dramatic. We expect some huge breakthrough, this aha moment, some giant sign that tells us everything is changing. But often the first sign is much, much gentler than that. It is simply that the heaviness is no longer suffocating you in quite the same way. It is that you can breathe a little deeper, think a little clearer, hope a little more. And maybe for the first time in a long time, Imagine that you may not stay stuck in this dark place forever. For me, that mattered. Because before that, I think part of me had started believing that this was just how life was going to feel now. Heavy, confusing, and overwhelming. But once I began feeling even the smallest return of hope, I realized that maybe the invisible weight I had been carrying did not have to define the rest of my life. Maybe it was real. Maybe it had wounded me. Maybe it had changed me. But maybe it was not the end of my story. Maybe it was the beginning of learning how to put some of that weight down. And putting the weight down did not mean that I stopped caring. It did not mean that the responsibilities disappeared. It did not mean that every relationship was repaired, every health question was answered, or every difficult feeling went away. For me, putting the weight down began with learning that I did not have to carry guilt as proof that I loved people. I did not have to punish myself to prove that I understood how my struggles affected Jason. I did not have to call myself lazy, selfish, or difficult in order to take responsibility for my life. I could be honest about what was happening and still have compassion for myself. I could care deeply about Jason and also admit that I needed help. I could want a better future and still acknowledge that I did not yet know how to get there. I could grieve relationships without pretending they did not matter. I could rest without turning rest into another reason to feel ashamed. And I could begin asking a different question. Not what is wrong with me, but what am I carrying, and does all of it still belong in my hands? Some of the weight was mine to face. Some of it needed to be shared. Some of it needed support from people I trusted. Some of it needed time. Some of it needed prayer. And some of it was never mine to control in the first place. That has been a difficult lesson for me, because when you love deeply, you can begin believing that it is your responsibility to fix everything, to repair every relationship, to prevent every disappointment, to protect everyone from worry, to make sure the people you love never have to struggle because of you. But that is an impossible weight for any one person to carry. I am learning that love does not always mean fixing. Sometimes love means telling the truth. Sometimes it means listening. Sometimes it means allowing someone to stand beside you. Sometimes it means apologizing when an apology is needed without making shame your permanent home. And sometimes love means accepting that there are things you cannot force, no matter how much you wish they were different. My faith has also helped me begin loosening my grip. There were many days when I did not have beautiful words to pray. Sometimes all I could say was, God, I cannot carry this today. And I am learning that an honest prayer does not have to sound perfect. It only has to be true. I believe God met me in those honest moments. Not by making every burden disappear immediately, but by reminding me that I was not abandoned inside it. There were days when hope came through prayer. Days when it came through Jason sitting beside me. Days when it came through learning something that finally helped my experience make sense. And days when it came through one small thought. Maybe this is not how I will feel forever. Friend, maybe you are carrying an invisible weight today. Maybe no one around you understands how heavy it has become. Maybe you are smiling, answering questions, taking care of what you can, and quietly wondering how much longer you can keep holding everything together. I want to ask you something gently. What are you carrying that no one can see? You do not have to answer publicly. You do not have to explain it perfectly, but name it honestly. Even if only to yourself. Is it grief? Guilt? Fear about your health? Worry about money? A relationship that changed? The pressure to be who everyone expects you to be? The belief that you should be handling life better than you are? Then ask yourself, does all of this have to remain mine alone? Is there one part I could share with someone I trust? Is there one expectation I could release? Is there one thing I could ask for help with? Is there one place where I could offer myself compassion instead of criticism? You may not be able to put every burden down today, but maybe you can loosen your grip on one of them. Maybe you can stop carrying it in silence. Maybe you can let someone see that you are tired. Maybe you can give yourself permission to admit, this is heavy and I need support. An invisible burden is still a real burden. You do not have to wait until you completely fall apart before you deserve care. You do not have to prove your exhaustion. You do not have to defend your pain. And you do not have to carry guilt for being human. For me, healing began when the weight became shared. When I understood more of what was happening. When I stopped confusing my struggle with my identity. And when I began believing that putting something down did not mean I had failed. It meant I was finally listening to what my mind, my body, and my heart had been telling me. Next week, we are going to talk about what happens when your emotions no longer feel like your own. The sudden tears, the anger, the sensitivity, the reactions that can make you wonder, why am I feeling everything so strongly? We are going to talk about approaching those emotions with curiosity and care instead of treating them as a character flaw. So until then, take a moment and ask yourself, what am I carrying that no one can see? And then, friend, let yourself believe that you deserve help carrying it. Take a deep breath. Be gentle with yourself. Keep choosing hope. And remember, I've been saving you a seat.